So thank you again for joining us for our Tech Talks Live with Tierpoint today. So a few pieces of information about the meeting conference that we're using here. If you are connected in with your computer, which I believe you are, you can raise your hand, and we're going to use the raise hand and chat functionality for folks that do have questions. So Christy in a moment is our moderator. Christy will be muting everyone in a moment. So again, use the chat feature to ask questions. If you want to be introduced back into the meeting, raise your hand if you would. And I think looks like people have figured out how to mute their camera. That's usually the first thing that people do figure out about this. And then if you can change your view by clicking on the 4 squares down the bottom. So a huge thank you to our sponsor, Tierpoint, and we have a couple of folks on with us. So I'll let the two of you right now introduce yourselves, if you wouldn't mind.
Go ahead, Brandon. Why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, sure. Brandon Keeley, Senior Account Executive at Tierpoint. Been with the company for about 10 years and looking forward to this today with corporate data voice solutions. So appreciate it.
All right. And then I'm Alvaro Gonzalez. I am the AVP of Partner Strategy and Enablement at Tierpoint. And thanks for the time to get to talk with you today. So to just kind of get us underway, let me get my screen share rolling here and kick us off.
Actually, I had a couple more things.
Oh, my bad. I forget. Go ahead.
No worries. So let me see if this will start again here. All right. So hopefully, okay. So we do have a few people from Corporate Data and Voice Solutions in attendance. I'll let you folks introduce yourselves.
Hi guys, I'm Pete Lankarge. I work down in Rhode Island here, and I'm the new guy on the team with CDVS. But happy to be here, and thanks to Tierpoint for hosting today.
Hi everybody, Kelly Kucher, Senior Client Specialist at Corporate Data.
Hi everyone, Rachel Neary, Client Specialist.
Hey everyone, Christy Sturgeon, Client Specialist, Marketing and Project Management.
Thank you. All right, so agenda, we're going to keep on track here. A little welcome, a little bit about Corporate Data and Voice Solutions for the folks that don't know us. Then Tierpoint's going to take over for a period of time, and at the end we do have Q&A and raffles for the folks that are on at the end. As I mentioned, a couple of housekeeping items. Christy will be muting all attendees. Presenters must unmute themselves to be heard after that point. We are recording this session. Each attendee that is present at the end will be receiving a Grubhub/Uber Eats type gift card. Is that right, Brendan?
I'm on mute. Yeah, sorry about that. Yes, that is correct.
All right. Names will be drawn at the end for Amazon gift cards. Again, you must be present to win at the end. To win. Please ask questions in the chat window. As I mentioned, each qualifying question receives an additional chance to win a raffle prize. A little bit more about CDVS, or Corporate Data and Voice Solutions. Our focus is on the customer and what is important to them, not what's important to us. We do take a consultative approach to help our customers improve communications internally and externally. We act as an extension of our customer's team. We assist with project planning and implementation. We are an ongoing additional resource to our customers many times throughout the days and weeks, especially during this crazy time that we are in today. Even though it might not be a core part of our business, our customers are reaching out to us asking for our opinions or guidance, who they can reach out to if it's if it's something that isn't part of our core competencies. So again, we act as an extension of our customers' team. We do deliver a high touch and a no touch approach, of course, today. Extremely high customer retention rate. We're passionate about what we do. And most importantly, we do our daily business with honesty, integrity, and accountability. We do want to be your partner, not just a vendor to you. And that, that's from day one through, years down the road. We have many customers that have been with us since 2003, since we started the business. So with that said, we're going to turn this over to the folks at Tierpoint. But before I forget to say it, stay safe, stay positive.
Q4 2019 was a pretty great time to be us because at Tierpoint, we actually had our best ever quarter as a company, and actually December was our best ever month as a company. So pretty awesome way to finish out the year. But actually Q1 of this year was also really crazy for us because, as it turns out, Q1 of 2020 smashed what we had done in Q4 of 2019, which was pretty unbelievable. And actually March of 2020 beat the record that was our former one for biggest month ever of December of 2019. So we had a pretty great plan, and hedging a little bit with our leadership so that we can kind of manage expectations. We really thought that we had this great plan for how we were going to go through the remainder of the year. People started in February, January to talk about like someone eating bats in China, but that didn't seem to have much to do with us. We ultimately figured that we had everything pretty figured out. And, the rest of the year was looking pretty great for us. But like the great philosopher Mike Tyson actually says, gives us a pretty great way to describe what it feels like for a lot of people right now. And that is, we had a plan, and everyone has a plan, Mike says, until they get punched in the mouth. So I bet a few of you can identify with the guy in this picture in a way. Or if we kind of stick with the metaphor, maybe to say that maybe it's not the feeling of you getting punched or your business getting punched, but you are a boxer and you are in the arena, and maybe your match is coming up later on. So, I think that a lot of us can kind of identify with this sudden sense of pretty unpleasant change. But what's better though than being able to take a few punches from Iron Mike here, if we're going to stick with our boxer metaphor for a minute? That's actually having a plan to avoid taking a few punches from Iron Mike, or having a plan to pay the bills in a way that just maybe doesn't involve being a boxer at all, right? It's one thing for winning the fight with Mike Tyson to be the end that your means are after. It's another thing to realize that the end you're after is creating and benefiting from the value that you're giving in the work that you're doing, as is the case for us, as is the case for corporate, as is the case for you. And that maybe the plan here should be to make a living in a way that doesn't involve being a boxer, right? Situation that we're in right now is full of pressures, but the pressures aren't new per se, right? Right now, resources aren't infinite. I think that's pretty clear on a number of levels to everybody. But resources before all of this weren't infinite either, right? Things may be harder at the moment than they were, but that's not to say that they were easy before. There have always been headwinds that we've had to face in our business and in our lives, right? But there's a difference between headwinds and whirlwinds, right? Having a plan, intentional action has always been important, but right now it's more important. And what we see over and over again in history is that those who adapt to changing circumstances can do better than those who don't adapt. So ultimately, that's really what I want to talk about. And ideally, at the end of this, give you two things. One will be an understanding of the way that Tierpoint, working with corporate and working with you, can be a valuable partner to help you solve the business problems that your business is facing. And at the same time, actually, I was explaining before we all got on the call that I'm trying to do this in the context of something really specific that I work on a lot, and that's strategy, because I think that a lot of people right now talk about strategy, but people don't necessarily mean the same thing or anything useful at all. So ideally, at the end of this, even if you don't have an immediate opportunity for us to work together as Tierpoint, corporate, and you, to at least give you something useful on the way out of it and a framework to think about this change. So every service provider in our industry, and probably every business in yours too, is really quick to share sort of statistics or examples of what changes are underway, what changes have taken place at the macro level. You know, this is a standard thing that we all do. We get research done, we get statistics together to be able to show things that are going on for people to ideally connect the dots and reach conclusions about this. And that's pretty useful, but it's not a complete solution to any of the problems that any of us face at any time, really, actually, because knowing what's happened elsewhere, knowing the change has happened, right? It's not enough by itself. There's a difference between data, which is super important, knowledge, which is even more important than that because it's data plus thought, and maybe what's even most important, what we could call wisdom, right? Knowing what to do with that, having a way to think about what to do with that thing. That's what's most important, right? So it's the difference between knowing that something happened, knowing what happened, and having a plan about what to do now. All kinds of people then want to have these conversations where the image that gets used is, well, you just need a compass and a map. A compass and a map without a destination can be really useful. But if you don't have an idea of a destination that you're trying to get to, they're not enough by themselves, right? The thing that fills that gap is this concept of strategy. So again, before we were on, I was talking up this book. I am the nerdiest person you will ever meet in your life. I read literally 50 business books a year. I think this is the one, bar none, best I have ever read. Extremely highly recommended. But really the thing I want to call out about it is this. There's a lot more talk than substance about strategy, because on the one hand, real strategy is hard work. And on the other hand, you know, according to this great expert, Richard Rumelt here, it has the effect of giving clarity. So sometimes actually great strategy, you look at it, you look back in time and it seems obvious, but the number of people who don't have strategy, who have bad strategy, clearly show that there's a pretty big gap here, and it can be something that's useful to put a framework around the way we think about and talk about this strategy concept in general, and specifically in what Tierpoint does working with our customers. So good strategy has to have three fundamental things for it to work, right? The first thing is what he calls the diagnosis, and that is you have to start with, what is the situation that I'm in? What are the obstacles that I need to deal with? Because anything that just starts with what am I going to do without what am I going to do it on or to or because of is like having a compass or a map without a destination. You have to start with understanding the map that you're on and then proceed from there to have what he calls a guiding policy to deal with this challenge. And that is to say, this is the obstacle that I've defined. It kind of implies you can't work on everything, so this is what's important. This is how I'm going to work on what's important. This is the stuff I'm trying to accomplish ultimately. And then finally, a set of coherent actions that are designed to carry out that guiding policy. I think that anything that doesn't have all three of these things, but it seems like the diagnosis oftentimes is what's hardest, because to get to the diagnosis, you have to filter through a lot of complexity. Ultimately, though, goals without a rationale are not good strategy because they're only part of the equation. We see that a lot in the people that we work with, and we've lived it a lot, probably ourselves as well. Understanding without action isn't a good strategy either, because all the great ideas in the world with nothing being done about them are of pretty limited usefulness. And then finally, obviously, action without goals or a plan isn't good strategy. Anyone can swing a hammer, but putting it in the right place to do what you're trying to do is what you need to have. Edison said it may be best. Inspiration without perspiration is hallucination. We need all of these elements put together. So in the context of the sorts of things that Tierpoint does right now, then, what are the things most frequently that are kind of like the diagnosis or the symptoms that are getting diagnosed right now based on the things that we're seeing. This was just a couple of days ago. There's a pretty interesting survey I ran across that, businesses operating data centers, be they service providers or not, were surveyed and asking them, hey, looking at the next 90 days, what are the top 3 risks that COVID poses to your organization's critical infrastructure operations, right? As it says here, select no more than 3, and then, top 3 responses are what were reflected. The top 2 at the similar value here: reduced level of IT infrastructure, operations staff, and then, data center project or construction delays. 45% of respondents came back with this. Close behind, reduced scheduled maintenance for equipment. We have loss of business revenue and demand. We have shortage of critical infrastructure. And then finally, failure of service partners to maintain service level agreements. We look at this and we say, gosh, these things make a lot of sense. And generally speaking, they also have a common root to the thing that has been most different about this sudden change that we're in right now. And that is that, in a way, they all have to do with staffing or with headcount. In the first case, generally people have done a pretty good job of planning for the infrastructure. But what happens when the people that you need the infrastructure to operate the infrastructure can't get to it? This is a new angle, be it because of shelter-in-place orders or because of illness. This is something that we're seeing similarly in like supply chain for food right now, right? You can plan for all the stuff going in, but if you fail to plan for the people being available for whatever reason to act on it, that's a pretty significant element of the equation. Reduce scheduled maintenance for equipment. I think this also can be reduced effectively to people to conduct this scheduled maintenance, people to get the parts or the fuel or whatever it is that's needed to conduct this thing. Loss of business revenue and demand. What's driving it? What's driving it is the fact that people have less money to spend. There's less money in circulation right now. Ultimately, the fundamental thing that's emerged as a big diagnosis of all of this COVID situation, the thing that's made it different, has been so many of our plans had to do principally with technology, so few of them had to do with the rest of the equation, and that was staffing. And this was the hole in the defense that's hurting so many industries so seriously. Some other common issues, though, that we have seen along the way, and they probably won't surprise you, will be companies that had on-site data centers. And so in this case, maybe the people could get there, maybe they couldn't, but add to that the fact that customers with on-site data centers also generally have network access for internet or for private transport that may not scale especially well. And what happens when now all of the network design that was put together to handle people being there are all elsewhere, right? That's been a real struggle. VPN licenses or firewall capacity has been kind of like a knock-on consequence of all of that. Another one has been companies that were really dependent on paper documentation that's not available from offsite, or companies now that are facing the rest of the year having had to divert capital that they were going to spend on something else, to be it laptops or any kind of other BYOD support, or to spend additional money on securing endpoints for home workers and all this sort of thing, right? That the money that was going to do something that was important now had to get spent on something else. So ultimately, again, I think that if we look at all of the things and we reduce so much of this right now to make a diagnosis of a common high-level problem, obstacle that so many people are facing in our industry and all kinds of things around it, it's scarcity, right? And so, in this case, if strategy is about defining our problems and deciding what to do about them, given limited resources, then committing those resources to solve them in an intentional way and doing the work. When we start changing the variables that result from or went into all of this stuff, we start to get a clear idea of a way to think about what a diagnosis is. And we'll end here actually with a little bit of a case study to look at a case, an example of this that actually was a very big win that we had shortly before all of this started, to show that What we're facing right now, these are all problems that existed there before. All of these challenges were there. It's just that right now we're seeing them in greater degree. So the stakes are higher, but the problems aren't necessarily new, which would also mean that at the end of this, there's nothing essentially unique about where we are now that couldn't potentially continue to be true 12 months from now, even if all the rest of this goes through the pipe. So breaking away for a second, though, from that kind of setup and the sort of philosophical part around this, I don't know how much those of you who are with us today know about Tierpoint. So I did want to kind of take a little bit of a detour to marry up the capabilities and to put the various parts of the stories together here. So, to do the work for something so important as how we feed our children, which ultimately, I think that in this context, all of us are thinking hard, not only about how we do it, but why we do it. Boy, it's good to have broad capabilities. And so one of the things that the way that Tierpoint talks about and think about ourselves is to say that we meet you where you are. There are a lot of companies in our industry who have maybe started out looking something like us, working in co-location with 40 data centers in 20 markets around the nation, with expertise in multiple different cloud platforms. And these can be hosted private clouds that we operate ourselves, based on both actually VxRail, VMware-centric offerings, but the ability to do Nutanix-based hosted private clouds as well. Network services to tie them together. We're not a company that will sell connectivity out to customer prem, but this is rather between our 40 data centers that we have. All of them have multi-provider, multi-path, diverse stack all along the way. Layer 2 and layer 3 connectivity, so private line transport to tie them all together, and the ability to sell multi-homed internet out of all of them. So, I don't know, the technical depth of you guys, but ultimately it's our IP space that allows us to use multiple internet providers to route traffic out so that a service interruption from any one provider doesn't affect the rest of the business. It gives us multiple ways to deliver that service. Everything that we do, starting with co-location into the cloud businesses that we conduct, network to tie it together, is tied into the fact that the data center and cloud business is effectively a gigantic aggregation of risk. I'm a big metaphor guy, as you've probably seen by now. If you think about us like a bank, yes, you can put your savings under the mattress of the bed at your home, and that can be a secure thing, although there's nothing purpose-built about your mattress, I hope, to protect thousands and thousands of dollars of your savings, right? We, on the other hand, because it is central to what we do, it is core to us, start at the data center layer and have hardened facilities with stringent access control at multiple levels so that we're hedging against the risk of unauthorized access. We have multiple power grids, multiple network providers, diverse and concurrently maintainable cooling infrastructure, so that effectively everything that we do is set up to have parts be able to fail without affecting what's perceived by our end customers. The network thing, again, I was mentioning, it works the same way, right? Security is the control over what goes in and goes out. Compliance is kind of a subset of that. Those of you who work in industries where you have HIPAA compliance regulations, you have PCI and things like that. Effectively, this is the practice of being able to follow and demonstrably certify following proper operations that handle this risk. So, this stuff is kind of a coherent whole. We're very, very widely recognized by Gartner, by Forrester, for example, for deep expertise in disaster recovery. It's not the only thing we do, but it is one that we do get a lot of historically very favorable press for. And finally, managed services. So ultimately, there are a lot of companies who at some point in their history looked like us, but there's been a trend in the industry for a lot of them to become product companies. So they now have specialized in being a co-location provider. Well, the point of all of this thing is simply this. There are lots of providers who've decided to become product companies, meaning that they are a co-location provider, or they are a cloud provider, or they are a managed services provider. The companies, though, who work with them and then come to us tell us, and again, it makes sense, that what they find themselves having to do is switching the complexity of the problem that they're trying to solve and replacing it with the complexity of either having to do a lot of it themselves or having the complexity of having to work with multiple different providers on piece part solutions. Tierpoint stayed very conscientious about actually staying not in the product business, but in the problem solving business. Actually, the way that Joe was describing it in the case of corporate data, I think that, philosophically, we're very similar to that. We do well by doing good. And to do that, we have this very broad set of capabilities, all focused on solving problems at the intersection of business and technology. The best solutions in the world that are in the wrong place, though, are of pretty limited use to people. So ultimately, orange dots on the map are places where we have data center facilities to serve our customers out of. All the orange dots have both data centers as well as team members like Brandon in this case, and pre-sales engineers and operations folks and all of this to be able to come together and work on solutions for customer problems. At the same time, because the cloud business in particular, disaster recovery as well, lends itself to being served well by having infrastructure where the business is not. Gray dots on the map represent people that we have working with customers in places where we don't have physical facilities present. But to run down all of this, I mentioned 40 data centers in the 20 markets that are mentioned here. Comprehensive solutions portfolio, we'll see a little bit more in just a moment. But ultimately, the cloud business with co-location is where we are doing really excellent work for our customer base. And in particular, one of the big strategic bets that we have made, because it fills a need that our customers have come to us about, has been hosted private clouds. Because we deliver hosted private clouds with every part of them dedicated to the end user customer that buys it for us, what it means is we can deliver them out of every city that we operate in as well. And this is something that turns out to be really significant for a lot of the companies that choose to work with us. Multi-tenant cloud pods of our own operation are a significant part of our business as well. We can also work into managing hyperscale cloud so that effectively we bring solutions to the table. We don't bring a product and try to fit your needs into what our capabilities are. We are a company that's made up of, now it's just a whisker below 1,000 people in the company. And finally, proven leadership. In this time of real fiscal upheaval and everything, actually, where there have been service providers very publicly going through serious financial problems, Tierpoint just a few weeks ago completed the process we had started about a year before of accepting additional investment to fuel growth for our company. And so in this case, again, other people are running out of money. We were actually turning away investors who wanted to make very significant investments in our company. And we took an amount, and from the investors that we chose, because our senior leadership team has been together for a long time, has a great track record. As kind of a trivia point, our CEO and founder, Jerry Kent, is long-running multi-made self-made multi-billionaire, whose first company, maybe you've heard of it, was called Charter Communications and was sold to a guy who maybe you have also heard of, Paul Allen. So ultimately, we are a privately held, very well-run company spread around the country and focused on doing good work for customers as the means for us to be successful. I mentioned before, comprehensive solutions portfolio. There's a lot on here. We can happily share this with you after the fact. I just want to start, though, by showing when we talk about a comprehensive solutions portfolio, what we mean is we have a lot of different capabilities that are brought to bear on solving customer problems. So again, it's one thing to talk about we can do many things. It's another to actually show what they are. We're going to wrap up with a case study here that shows the interaction with a customer ultimately making a diagnosis, seeing things differently, and coming out with a solution that cuts across many of these to give them sort of a solution that is better than the sum of the parts would have been. So let me take a moment for a second because I cannot watch the chat or anything. If anyone has any questions up to now.
As of right now, we don't have any questions.
Okay, terrific.
Okay.
So in that case, let me then marry a little more closely now the two kind of threads of this conversation. One of them is the strategy side, and the other is Tierpoint capability side. So one of the ways that actually strategy kind of falls apart and people give up on it is that they think that every move that they take along the way has to get closer to that specific end goal, and complexity around that can seem totally unmanageable. So effectively, people say, my God, that's so complicated that it becomes this kind of tail chasing nonsense that doesn't help. In Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, actually, Rommelt, one of the things I think that's very valuable about this book actually talks about two ideas that are really useful in the context of this. And the first of them is, he calls it taking positions like in a game of chess, because in the early stages of a game of chess, what players who are doing it right are doing is they're moving pieces to put them in positions where they're protected and they can have the most valuable, most favorable future options available to them, right? The first move of a game of chess isn't some strategic masterpiece necessarily. There's kind of a phase where until clarity emerges about some things, you take positions that give you the best chance to make the best decisions downstream. You open up your future by what you're doing today. You do that by having a broad set of capabilities that you can bring to bear on this. And then that leads into kind of this idea of the proximate objective. There are two things I think about that that are really important. The first of them is a proximate objective says, hey, big picture, we know where we're trying to go, but we need to cut things down to size that we can accomplish and reliably make progress towards that end goal. It's kind of just like taking a position along the way. When you have, as is the diagram here that I've taken, this is some stuff from a publication that's on our website, part being coverage from Gartner and part being a graphic from it that kind of goes through the various permutations of what people can do. I want to point out that the flexibility that we can grant to our customers, and this is something that plays out over and over again, can allow them to start with something very simple. Something as simple as taking a rack of space in a data center, but working with a provider that actually then can bridge into all of the other capabilities that are out there without having to make a painful decision about changing a provider because you started with someone who couldn't give the full runway of other capabilities. This turns out to be something that's really valuable to allow our customers to start where they are and to evolve with us over time without having to give back, without having to incur difficult migrations or things like that. This set of capabilities married to taking position and proximate objectives is something that our customers get a lot of use out of and is one of the ways that we're really valuable to the people that we get to work with. So making the context of the conversation bigger, though, which is generally what we're talking about here, can have some pretty obvious downsides. Bigger contexts sometimes have bigger solutions and bigger price tags, right? If we start with something thinking it's going to be very basic and we end up getting something that is less basic, then we often have to have conversations about more resources. So looking for materials for this talk, I ran across this, and again, I'm pretty nerdy. I hope you are too. But this was pretty great, pretty funny at the same time. The three little pigs here that the comic is referring to made their initial diagnosis that what they wanted was to have individual homes that kept them warm and maybe saved them some money. But in the end, because they had each of them something that didn't necessarily withstand the predictable obstacles they were going to face, they got bad consequences out of it. So in this case, this negotiation. The point is this, though, making the question bigger can make the solution bigger, And to do that, it's very important to be prepared then to have a good rationale for why more resources are going to be needed sometimes to solve these bigger problems, right? Part of the proper strategy and planning is actually anticipating the risks and deciding and negotiating the agreements to put the resources that you need to solve the problems that you foresee. So,
Hey,
go ahead.
Alvaro, one last thing. At the very bottom of the screen, there's like a hide button that's going right over that quote in the on the illustration. We can see. There you go. Perfect.
Better? All right. Better?
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Great. Yeah, sorry, it was scaling on my screen. Hey guys, we're great at technology. Anyway, the point is this. Making strategic decisions, having all these capabilities also means that sometimes it's going to be important to have your rationale prepared to convince people to come along. But at the same time, the value of actually making these plans and being ahead of things so that people aren't forced to try to make painful decisions in the throes of the problem you were trying to avoid is pretty worthwhile, right? Fixing a leak is one thing. Fixing a leak when the roof is on fire is another. Or Jamie Dimon actually had a great quote during the 2008 financial crisis, which we all came back from. And that was, it's one thing to buy a house, it's another thing to buy a house on fire, right? Properly foreseeing the risks that are really out there rather than trying to defend budgets, to defend fiefs sometimes can be pretty troublesome. So it's a predictable obstacle that people run into doing this sort of thing. But at the same time, I think especially now, it's not hard to see the value in doing it. So kind of rounding third and heading for home a little bit with this stuff, I wanted to take now this sort of two fairly theoretical things. One, the Tierpoint capabilities in general, and two, this little framework that I'm looking to offer to you, and put it into then a case study that instead of us talking to you about what we can do, we can talk with you about what we did. So this is a process that actually culminated. The contract for this got signed December 31st of 2019. And ultimately, this initial situation here going into it was that a not-for-profit fraternal benefits organization with 1.7 million customers, this was a business who on the one hand does charitable works, and on the other hand has, as it turns out, a surprisingly significant insurance operation to them. It was coming up at the end of a contract with an incumbent provider. So in this case, it's an opportunity to revisit, and it's almost a need to revisit because the equipment refresh cycle that these people were on was synced up with the co-location contract that was where this stuff was housed, right? They got the colo agreement originally, they bought the gear to put into it, and they timed those two contracts or lifespans up with each other so that they wouldn't have unnecessary difficulty making a change at the end of it. This is what they come into it. So they issue an RFP to select a new data center co-location provider. And they think in particular that really they're going to be looking for co-location space again, and then network connectivity to be able to get disaster recovery coverage for both a VMware x86 environment and IBM Z-Series environment that they have as parts of their business. So effectively, initial situation is they have co-location today. It is for a disaster recovery application. The contract is up, the hardware is up, so they have to change everything. They begin this process saying, let's get an RFP rolling to look at how we can drive some cost out of this equation. An inflection point in the process, though, came along effectively because in this due diligence process, Tierpoint was in the mix and had the opportunity to do some workshops and really to do some strategy work with this company to be able to talk about something starting so basically as how are we going to migrate what you already have? The equipment's not moving, but the workloads need to move. They went in there 5 years ago. So let's take stock of what needs to move, right? What are all those applications that are running? How do they relate to each other? Thinking about a migration. This then leads to a follow-on cloud assessment workshop and migration planning to do this, because ultimately the cloud assessments that we would do can really cover simply putting workloads into a virtualized environment. Cloud assessment doesn't mean you're going to AWS, right? So effectively, they did this due diligence and they began to change the way they thought about the question, right? The outcome of this was they started with an initial goal to select a data center colocation provider, but they didn't go into it thinking about how they could change how they were handling disaster recovery itself. The end state through all of this process was that they decided to have some stuff in colocation, some stuff that they would buy, but also to be able to get out of the capital expenditure and the management overhead to handle some of those cloud workloads and have a hosted private cloud from us instead. They also wrapped managed services around security for multiple locations, network for some replication, DR orchestration, and operating system management around it, right? The outcome of the process was really different from what they thought they were going into. So what happened in that case? Well, effectively, if we go back to this little framework that I wanted to share with you, the diagnosis of their situation changed, because the diagnosis that they went into was, we have a contract, we need a new contract, let's make this cheaper. But in the process of doing all of the discovery and looking at this in a broader sense, they realized that their current approach to ensuring business continuity, disaster recovery, isn't giving the best value relative to the resources that go into it. Amortization or an equipment refresh cycle or the way we've always done it weren't good enough as the way to think about how they were going to come out of this process. So the diagnosis from, we need a new contract doing the same thing and make it cheaper, to the diagnosis is there's an imbalance of what we're putting into all of this and what we're getting out of it, changed the trajectory of what happened. A guiding policy, we could say, that came out of this was actually, once the conversation changed, once the diagnosis changed, what to do about it went away from, let's get a cheap co-location agreement, to let's make the best use of resources and align it with overall benefit, not align to silo, right? Solve the problem rather than checking the box. So they ended up spending more money on this thing. Of course, it's true, but they also got to get out of the capital expenditure that they would have needed to have to front end all of the money they were going to spend on that. They get cycles back for internal headcount by moving and outsourcing some of these items, operating system management, for example, where expertise in OS management doesn't necessarily add value to the business like an IT person on their staff being an expert in their business can, right? So effectively, the things where being an expert in something that is specific to the technology could come to us, so that the things that being an expert involves knowing the business and how to use tech to make it better could stay with them. That was a huge upside for them. And ultimately they got cash flow benefits, they got operational benefits, and they freed up capacity to innovate so that they would be able to have better outcomes, not just for the DR project, but for the business in general. This is where they started out. The coherent actions that followed out of this and made this all a rational process was to start from the ground up, right? They came into this relatively uncritically. They came into this thinking back to where we started with, a plan that was based on having headwinds, but not whirlwinds. But when they realized that circumstances looked similar, but possibilities were completely different, they reassessed and they asked a bigger question, right? They looked not only on what's in the colo today, but rather, what are the applications? Where are they running? Why are they there? What's the work effort required to do that? And what are we not doing elsewhere because of what we had to put into doing that? Completely different assessment that drove a completely different outcome. The proximate objective was to look at disaster recovery context and to say, what can we do in the context of this, but that can allow us to really pursue a different trajectory going forward, getting more out of the things that we're doing here to innovate and take advantage. They ultimately decided to pivot from self-service DR, which had a low cost but a high price, or a low price but a high cost, depending on how you want to talk about it, and go to as a service model that let them defer capital expense, reduce work effort from on-staff resources on things where being on staff didn't add value. And if we circle back for a moment then to the set of capabilities that we had before, I checked the box here with everything that effectively went into what this customer decided to do. They started thinking we were going to have co-location and a little bit of network, and they came out of it with DDoS protection, with managed security around firewalls and web application firewalls and encryption that we administered for them, all of these helping with their regulatory compliance needs and the sensitivity of their business. IDS, IPS as well, intrusion detection and prevention. All of these are skills that are actually very hard to find, right? People, the scarcity around security was happening before all this because it's very hot, which means people to do it are expensive, they're hard to find, and they move around a lot. This was a home run for them. The ability to have disaster recovery as a service and data protection as part of what they did with us was really great. Instead of having their own single-threaded connectivity to get to this stuff, they were able to use both private transport between two of our facilities as well as our multi-homed internet to give them lots of ways to diversify their risk and to avoid single points of failure. And so on down the line. They used multi-tenant cloud for some of their applications. They used dedicated hosted private cloud for others. They have some IBM infrastructure that we're providing for them in there as well, and wrapped it all up with the OS management and began with consulting services to take something that could have been obvious, but a real missed opportunity to just take like for like and try to make it 10% cheaper and turn it into, people talk about digital transformation, and that's what it looks like. So ultimately, taking a different look and bringing a proper strategic framework to bear on this, and not looking at just what's obvious, but rather looking under the covers and then making a direction and the complementary actions to get there, turned into a great win for the customer, a great win for the partner that we worked with on it, and a great win for us ultimately, which is how the best business outcomes are reached. So that's a lot of talking for me. Ultimately, where the rubber meets the road would be, there are a number of us here at Tierpoint who are here to serve you and are excited to get to work with you. Brandon, who was helping me out with being on mute and things like that, is a senior account executive in your area and available with, I don't know if Nick Molina, one of the SEs on his team there too, was able to join us, but we're all here looking forward and hoping to get the opportunity to serve you and to help you figure some of these out. So that's what I have. Thank you, and eager to answer any questions that you might have.
Great job, Alvaro.
Yes, absolutely. So I would like to open it up for questions. Again, just as a reminder, if you did not know, the more questions that you ask, the more chances to win a gift card at the end here. So again, opening it up for any questions. Appreciate the great presentation we just saw, by the way.
And we do have, for the participants that are on, this is Brandon Keeley from Tierpoint. Nice to meet everybody, and I think I've met some of you in the past, so good to have you on, and thanks for the new folks that are joining. Hopefully you took something away from this today, and maybe it's raised some questions of how it impacts your role and your business. We also have on Nick Molina, who is my senior solution engineer. He's local in New England, out of Massachusetts. I live in New Hampshire. And we're here today to help you guys out, to answer any questions that you might have. And we're happy to take any side conversations. We'd be thrilled to open up and offer out a free workshop session with you guys to talk a little bit further about your strategic objectives and anything that you're looking at evaluating to get an opinion on, or just a fresh set of eyes from Tierpoint. So want to offer that. So that's out there, and you can get in touch with your corporate data voice rep to schedule that, and reach out to us directly as well. But I'll stop talking. Any specific questions from anybody today?
Well, I don't see any in the chat either. So, well, again, want to thank you. Definitely thank you, folks from Tierpoint, for joining us this week on our live event here. So, want to keep on track. We have 2 more minutes, so let's do the raffles as we mentioned. So, it's live. No funny business here. So, we have everybody's name in the jar here. So, Sean Donnelly. So Sean, you won one of the gift cards. So it's an e-gift card. We'll be sending that via email. So appreciate you joining us. And Elvis. So Elvis, you also won a gift card. So that's fantastic.
Congrats, guys.
Yeah, nice job. So again, thank you so much. Appreciate everybody's time today. Thank you again to Tierpoint. So that was absolutely fantastic information. I actually learned some information that I didn't know. So appreciate that. So again, rounding 12 o'clock now. So please reach out to one of the reps that introduced you to the event here today. Be safe, be positive, be healthy, everyone. And again, thank you so much.